thanks for joining us. I'm Lynda Kinkade. Welcome to CNN Newsroom. Well, pressure is mounting on Saudi Arabia over the fate of missing Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. New reports add to the Turkish claim that he was murdered. A Turkish newspaper says Khashoggi set his Apple Watch to record before walking into the Saudi consulate and captured audio of his own death. If Saudi Arabia is found responsible, US President Trump warns there will be severe punishment. Well, our Nick Robertson joins me now from outside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. And Nick, this is an incredible claim that by Turkey that this journalist used his watch to record this audio. Is it possible that Turkey had this consulate bugged? And what evidence do they claim to have?
Well, we know that Turkish officials have been sharing audio and video recordings of what they believe is the brutal torture, beating and murder of Jamal Khashoggi inside the consulate on the 2nd of October, minutes after he went in. They've shared that evidence of their investigation with their allies and partners around the world, other intelligence agencies. So we know that these recordings exist because we've been briefed about it from sources. But how did they get those recordings? Of course, one of the pieces of information that came to light last night was in a pro-government newspaper saying that they talked to their trusted sources, and the narrative was that Khashoggi had gone in there with his Apple Watch set on audio record that was uploading audio files to his cell phone that it was linked to outside, that his girlfriend, his fiancée rather, was holding. Now, there seems to be technical faults in that article. For one, it said that his interrogators are trying to break into the watch to steal the data using his fingerprint. Well, such a watch doesn't exist to our knowledge. So there are holes in that argument. But yes, it does seem to get back to potentially here are the Turkish authorities trying to cover the fact that they're bugging, they are bugging equipment inside the consulate, breaking the diplomatic conventions of consulates and embassies around the world. That would be a black mark against Turkey. But I think what we are hearing from them here is them continuing to push the narrative that they have these recordings. They're trying to put pressure on Saudi Arabia. They're trying to put pressure on President Trump to get tougher on Saudi Arabia. But the real barometer and test of how the relationship between Turkey and Saudi Arabia is going right now, and that comes down to this sort of working group to get access for the investigators into the consulate. We still haven't seen Turkish investigators be allowed into that consulate to do the forensic tests in the areas in the consulate that they want to do. And that has to be the barometer of where this is going. And the background of how the government is trying to drip out information about these audio recordings keeps that all front and center. Pressure on Saudi Arabia, pressure on the White House. Lynda?
All right, Nick Robertson for us. Good to have you with us. I want to stay on this story and go to Sam Kiley, who joins me now from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And Sam, Saudi Arabia continues to deny any involvement in a potential murder here. But they don't seem to be offering any evidence that this journalist left the consulate.
No, Saudi Arabia, you're quite right, Linda, is sticking very strongly to the argument, to its line, that yes, Mr. Khashoggi was in the consulate and that he left. There is no CCTV evidence that he left, but there is of him going in. Nonetheless, none other than Prince Abdulaziz bin Saud, who is the interior minister here, has issued a statement, or rather he's quoted by the Saudi press agency, that's the government-run press agency, hitting back at all of the drip feed allegations that have come out, not just from Turkey, but even stuff that has been sourced, information that's been sourced by legitimate Western organizations, Western media organizations. And he is quoted as saying, "The Minister of Interior affirmed the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's condemnation and denunciation of the false accusations circulated in some media on the Saudi government and people against the background of the disappearance of the Saudi citizen Jamal Khashoggi." He also stressed that what has been circulating about orders to kill him are lies and baseless allegations against the government of the kingdom. Now, that's a pretty sweeping set of absolute repudiations of what is being alleged elsewhere in the media, particularly in Turkey. And this has been echoed by Saudi Arabia's allies, notably the United Arab Emirates, and really should be seen, I think, partly to do with the Saudi effort to create the perception, perhaps the truth, that this was nothing, that the disappearance of the Washington Post columnist has nothing to do with them. But also, a lot of columnists have been writing about how this is somehow the narrative emerging from Turkey is a propaganda effort inspired by the Muslim Brotherhood through Qatar and Turkey. Qatar and Turkey, of course, are in strong alignment together as rivals with the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The latter two, of course, have already imposed an embargo on Qatar, indeed a blockade on Qatar.
Sam,
Lynda?
US President Trump is promising severe punishment if Saudi Arabia is behind this. He's already ruled out pulling out of the multi-billion-dollar arms deal. So what could severe punishment entail? What would hurt Saudi Arabia?
Well, that's a multi-billion-dollar question, I think, Lynda. I mean, I think it's pretty unlikely that there would be the sorts of sanctions that we've seen imposed on, say, Russia for its behaviour in poisonings in the United Kingdom and over its support of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, because Russia is an absolute rival, whereas Saudi Arabia is a tight and close ally. It's not only the recipient of a large amount of weapons that are bought from, notably from the United States, but also from France and the United Kingdom too. Many billions of, hundreds of billions of dollars involved in that kind of trade. It's also the centre of efforts to trace the funding of international terrorism. This is the world headquarters for that effort, established just last year jointly by the United States and Saudi Arabia. There is a huge amount of oil dependency on Saudi Arabia for the whole world, effectively. So it's not an easy country to quote-unquote punish. What it is doing, though, is trying to move itself forward towards this target of 2030 set by the Crown Prince here to try and establish a much more modernised and open society to attract investment for a post-fossil fuel, a post-oil economy. This sort of incident is a severe and potentially permanent stain on the reputation of Saudi Arabia, and we've seen that with the upcoming investment conference due to start next week, with a large number of media organisations, but also others, Sir Richard Branson and others, at least temporarily either pulling out of that conference or indeed suspending negotiations over investment. So it could get nasty, but it's going to be highly complicated to do this so-called punishment, Lynda.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, Sam, Kiley for us. Good to have you on the story. Thanks so much.